everyone, to the latest installment of Back to Business video series brought to you by the Mountain View Chamber of Commerce. I'm Peter Katz, the President and CEO of the Chamber. Before we start, we would like to have a moment of silence in respect of the recent tragedies in Minnesota and in solidarity with the movements across the country. So if you'll join with me. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Ryan Mann, owner of TeamLogic IT. He's been supporting small and medium businesses for, oh gosh, a long time, more than 20 years, in the roles ranging from technical to sales to management. TeamLogic IT of Mountain View is one of more than 200 TeamLogic IT offices across the US. We're lucky to have them right here locally and have them be chamber members as well. They specialize in providing customized IT solutions for their clients that include services, support, and product sales. His talk today is timely, as so many businesses are doing more online, both commerce as well as day-to-day operations like meetings. There are new, often ignored risks of cyber theft. Ryan will help us understand this evolving landscape and what you can do to protect your business going forward in this new post-pandemic world. And with that, let me hand it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. As Peter said, we are TeamLogic IT of Mountain View. For those of you familiar with Mountain View, we're offshore line, right by 101, kind of on that side. So we've spent the last 3 months busier than usual, helping clients very quickly adjust to a work from home strategy, even if one didn't exist at all for some of our clients. Now we're spending our time helping our clients move back to a work from home strategy that incorporates the office to some extent. So I just kind of wanted to kind of go through that process and talk about some of the things that we're seeing and maybe make you aware of some of the things to be on the lookout for from a cybersecurity perspective. So we've decided to entitle this the work from home paradigm shift, because it's not really a work from home thing. It's not a business as usual. We really don't know what it's going to be, but we want to talk about some of the back to business considerations of going from whatever it is you're at now to whatever you're going to be, particularly as it relates to cybersecurity. This presentation actually started off as a cybersecurity one, but cybersecurity never makes sense to look at by itself. It really needs to be considered as a balance between what makes sense for the business from an operations standpoint and from a cost perspective, and that kind of thing. So you can't really have a cybersecurity discussion in a silo. People often ask me, clients and potential clients and just random people, are we secure? And it's an easy question to answer, because the answer is that there is no such thing as secure. There are different levels of security. A better question is, are we appropriately secure? And I think to answer that question, you really have to look at the needs of the business to understand whether or not you are appropriately secure. Security is never easy, it's never cheap, and it's also never done. So it's not just a yes or no question. It's not something that you can answer and then say, okay, well, we're good. It has to constantly be looked at. It's not convenient. So I think, as I said, the conversation needs to start with an understanding of the business needs. So I kind of hope we can kind of talk through some of that stuff. And the things that I hope to be able to talk about are, let's see, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Apologies. So how COVID-19 has affected the IT landscape, just generally speaking, and then considerations for a work from home strategy that probably incorporates the office as well. So COVID-19 obviously hasn't had any change on technology itself per se. What it has done is change the IT needs of a business and how we access the services that already existed. So From a security perspective, here's some of the things to kind of be on the lookout and consider as you move either towards a work from home strategy or back to a work from the office strategy. Scams are prevalent. This is the main thing. We are much more vulnerable to scams because it is such a changing landscape. A lot of people are out there on the internet, they're looking for information, and it's very easy to get the wrong information or stumble upon a place on the website that isn't valid. If any of you have gone through the process of trying to get a PPP loan or an EIDL loan for your business, you know that good information is very difficult to find. And the lack of good, reliable information leads to an opportunity for people to present misinformation and get people sucked into some sort of scam. So just scams in general are something that that is more prevalent and we're more susceptible to. Related phish threats. So a phish threat would be something sent via email that tries to get someone to click on something. Phish threats are far and away the most common delivery mechanism for scams nowadays. And for the same reasons, because things are so changing, we are considerably more vulnerable to get something and think it's valid. And because it's not, a routine type of thing that we're doing, people are much more likely to click on something and then head down that whole rabbit trail. Another thing to consider is that people are working on less secure networks now. Typically, business networks are secure. They have a firewall. They have things in place that protect that network. As we all moved away and started working from our homes, we were working on most likely less secure networks. Most homes don't have firewalls. They don't have things in place to help protect us from doing things that we shouldn't do. So that's kind of become the new landscape. Similarly, the workstations that people are working on are not necessarily protected. A business computer will almost certainly have antivirus software on it. IT will patch it on a regular basis. Steps will be taken to make sure that those workstations don't have vulnerabilities. As people go and they work from home, they might be working from their home workstation. They may be using their kid's workstation. Those workstations are not necessarily and are likely not protected to the extent that a business computer would be protected. We have less visibility into what employees are doing. So a big part of security, of cybersecurity, is actual physical security. So just like one of the largest vulnerabilities for places is getting a rock thrown through a window and getting their server taken, that's a piece of it. So similarly, just visibility into what employees are doing, the fact that they're not in the office, they're less likely to do the right thing and more inclined to maybe do the wrong thing in some cases. So that's something to be aware of as your staff moves out remotely. There's also less control over what employees are doing. So as we send employees out to work in their homes, they may be doing things that we can't see. If they're behind a firewall, then there's some control over where they can get to. Maybe there's web filtering in place that prevents them from going to websites they shouldn't go to. So there's some control given up when you're pushing employees out to work remotely. So another thing to consider about the changing IT landscape are just technology changes more in general. So more and more there is a need to remotely access services, kind of like I've touched on. So, if everyone's working from the same office, there is a way to access the services being provided by this server on site or things like that. We have seen a huge trend very quickly to provide some remote access to services either in the office or in the cloud, which touches on the next one. So the move to the cloud has been expedited. Most companies had a kind of slow strategy towards getting to the cloud. It was done like one service at a time. Maybe it was done when a server became end of life, or maybe when the server failed, it was like, okay, well, let's now move that service to the cloud. This has certainly caused an expedite of move to the cloud. So services like file services or email services that may have been provided by a server, businesses, small businesses especially, are quickly trying to move those things to the cloud so that they're not dependent on remote access services to be able to get into the server, which creates a more complicated solution. We've also seen a significant increase in the demand for video conferencing. This is a technology that existed, and there's lots of different solutions, but the adoption of it has been accelerated. The acceptance of it has been more prevalent. So that's a huge impact on the way that we do things. We're on a Zoom meeting right now. I'm sure all of us are on more Zoom meetings nowadays than we have been in the past. So it's going to have a continued effect on how we do business normally. We will probably do less face-to-face meetings, certainly in the short term, but probably in the long term as people become more accepting of doing things this way and have a better understanding of the capability of those things. So as we move either more towards a work from home strategy or try and incorporate moving back to the office, here are some of the considerations that you should have as a business owner or an employee. The first is accessibility. So it would be easy to start with security as the first thing to consider when doing this, but like I said earlier, security goes hand in hand with other things. So the first thing is to understand what you need access to, and then once you can determine what the access needs are, it creates a much easier situation to lock down and secure. Doing it the other way around, trying to define security before accessibility, would be like trying to buy locks for the doors in your house without knowing what kind of doors or how many doors you had. So it's better to define the doors, determine what access is required, and then from there lock that strategy down. So security would be the next consideration when coming up with a strategy. And then the last one is control. Like, how much control does the business and should the business have over an employee's work environment? And that's going to vary dramatically from business to business and need by need. So jumping into a little more detail on some of those items, going first to accessibility. This one's kind of obvious, but people are moving from desktop computers to laptop computers. There is a trade-off with laptops. Laptops don't have as much, like, you can't connect as many monitors to them. Don't tend to be as powerful, tend to be a little more expensive, but the trend is definitely towards laptops rather than desktops. There was a huge run on these in the beginning of the coronavirus situation. That has tended to ease recently. We are able to get laptops nowadays, and I don't see many people buying desktops because there is so much uncertainty about where employees are going to need to work. So that is one trend we're seeing. I touched on this earlier. The need for remote access has suddenly become very prevalent. So some of the ways that's done are either through like a remote desktop connection, which is like a built-in Windows protocol for accessing a remote computer. VPN is a more secure way to be able to connect to a computer, to connect to a network, and then from there you could connect to a workstation or other services within that network. So that's another method. Or then through remote control applications like Go to My PC or Log Me In. There's a bunch of different applications that allow you to remotely control your office computer from home. So those are kind of the three of the ways to gain remote access to services that are in the office still. And we're doing an implementation of a lot of these kind of things, or changing things about the configuration of existing businesses to give them more ability and more power with the stuff they have in place already. There is, like I mentioned earlier, the accelerated move to the cloud. This includes things like email. Email is very commonly in the cloud already, right? So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, very common for email servers to be on premise. That has moved pretty quickly. Well, actually not quickly, it's taken a while to get there. But those that are still on-premise email servers in the office, this has created that additional motivation to move to an Office 365 or a G Suite type of solution. File services, we've done a fair number of movement of file services to the cloud. This is a very common thing for something like Ignite, which is a Mountain View company, Dropbox type of a solution where you don't have to store your files on a server. You can have them in the cloud. Everyone can get to them from wherever they happen to be, whatever workstation they happen to be on. It's a secure solution, so it's not most people think the cloud and they get a little scared security-wise. I would suggest that things in the cloud are more secure than on-premise. servers. I mentioned earlier the scenario where someone throws a rock into a window and they run off with the server. That's a very real security vulnerability for these services. So the cloud should be secured, and you should do the cloud in a secure way, but the cloud itself is not inherently insecure. Another thing moving to the cloud is phone systems. So it used to be very common for there to be an on-premise phone system. You'd have a phone on your desk. That phone was connected to that system and you had phone lines in there. Now voice over IP is very prevalent in the workplace and has become an asset for the work from home strategy. For our office in particular, most of our employees, when it came time to work from home, we picked up our desk phone, we plugged it into our home network, and it found its home, and it worked exactly as it did in the office. So phone system is a big one. If you've got an office that basically you're having to come up with a solution just so you have a way to answer the phone, a voice over IP solution basically removes the physical location from the need there. So that's something that people are moving towards. The last consideration is communication. So things like Slack or Teams, like an instant messenger type solution, are invaluable when you have a staff working from multiple locations to be able to easily communicate with each other in much the same way they would if they were in an office, right? You just kind of poke your head up and talk to someone on the other side of the cube. Using Slack or Teams, it gives that ability to just have a quick one-off conversation without being super formal like you would be in an email or a letter. So those solutions have become very prevalent and very important as we move to different places. I touched on video conferencing earlier, so I won't go too much into it, but that's become a more accepted, better way of meeting for the current situation. And then again, VoIP is important for being able to provide less interruption and disruption for the way you used to communicate on the phone for a home environment. So that's it for that one. So I wanted to get a little bit more into the security aspects from work from home also. So the first detail to consider here is, show up, there we go, antivirus, anti-malware, and anti-ransomware. So these, in a business setting, these are fundamental security things to have endpoint protection on workstations to protect against viruses, malware, and ransomware. The issue with the work from home strategy is that we've now sent people out to their homes and maybe they're not using a business computer that has this stuff on there. So if someone's working from home and they're using a home workstation, there's no knowing if it has antivirus. There's no controlling whether or not it gets updates. Things like anti-ransomware probably don't exist on it. So if you've got a staff working on home computers, it's very important to be able to at least make them aware of this. There are free home solutions that work just fine for these things, at least for the antivirus and anti-malware pieces of that. So that's something that is very important to make sure that exists on anyone accessing work services from a computer. That computer should have these things on it. Similarly, patches. So business computers are very often patched. The IT department takes care of rolling those out to make sure they stay up to date. Vulnerabilities that exist with Windows when it comes out, or in some cases Macs when they come out, are frequently patched and dealt with. Home computers are far less likely to be patched, so that's something to be aware of. Make employees aware of it. Maybe even take steps to see that these things are in place on anything accessing work resources. The next thing is secure wireless. So I think the assumption is that, you know, people connect to things and they assume like, oh, okay, I'm connected, I'm good to go. You want to make sure people that are working from home are not connecting to some kind of shared wireless or a public wireless. If they are using wireless, it should be using current protocols. It should be secured with a password. So most people, you know, use the password or the wireless on their Comcast router or their home router. That's fine, but it should be configured properly. So it's something to consider. Just connecting to a public wireless does basically make that workstation at risk. Another thing to possibly consider is a firewall. Most places or most homes don't have a physical firewall at their house. It's a very common thing for businesses. So considering putting a software firewall on each individual workstation would also be a consideration. It's not as good as a physical firewall that sits on the network, but it's certainly better than not having anything at all. The next topic is VPN. So I touched on this a little bit earlier. If people are going to be in the public, connecting to public wireless, VPN is absolutely the more secure way to do that. So if people have to connect to a Starbucks or a hotel wireless, there's certainly some vulnerabilities that come with other people being able to spoof that connection or things like that. The way to lock that down is to make sure that people are connecting through a VPN, which creates a secure tunnel so that anything that they do within that tunnel is protected. So go to Starbucks, you connect to your VPN, you work as you normally would, but everything is going to go through that secure tunnel so other people can't eavesdrop on the things you're doing. Last one here, I think it's the last one here. Oh, no, there's one more. DNS protection is something that will lock down and monitor the connections to the internet to make sure that people aren't clicking on known bad websites or links that are known bad to go to far off regions of the country. I think in the presentation I have a little example later that I'll get into that something like DNS protection would guard against. And the last thing is, and probably the most secure thing, is user security training. The best defense against all of this stuff is having employees or people that know what they should and should not do and know where vulnerabilities are and how to recognize things before they do the wrong thing. Most people are aware of IT stuff. That's why some places like TeamLogic IT of Mountain View exist, is because not everyone knows all this stuff, and it does change frequently, and there are frequent vulnerabilities that are new to the world, and it's very difficult to keep up on them. So some level of security training, even if it's just showing people this to make them aware, like, oh yeah, I don't have antivirus on my home workstation, I should probably go find some of that. That stuff is probably the most important and can really make up for areas that are lacking in a lot of these areas. So I mentioned that I would bring something up about the DNS protection. So what you see on your screen is an email I got. It was about a week and a half ago during this COVID thing. For those of you who are familiar with QuickBooks, either sending out invoices or receiving invoices, you'll recognize that this looks exactly like a QuickBooks invoice. So I got a few of these in my mailbox. I didn't think too much of it because we have a process that we go through to pay things, and because that process exists, I didn't have to click on these things. But someone brought it to my attention, and I looked closer at it. And on first inspection, it looked like a reasonable invoice. As I moused over some of these things, this is an actual copy, this is just a picture, but if you mouse over the privacy, security, and terms of service, that all point into its stuff, so it looked legitimate. The only way that we were able to determine it was fraudulent is if you moused over the review and pay icon here, and it showed a non-intuit.com address. So this is just an example of a phishing scam or a scam that's out there that people should be on the lookout for. Don't just go clicking on things, especially when it's, pay this, pay that. Something like DNS protection, if I had clicked on it, would have blocked it because the link, as it turns out, was going to like Argentina or something like that. So the DNS protection would look at that request and say, hey, it looks like you're trying to get to some place that doesn't look legitimate, and it would prevent me from doing that. But something like user training would also go a long ways towards helping people recognize, oh, I shouldn't just click review and pay and go through my normal behaviors. I should take some steps initially to make sure this is legitimate. All right, so moving on. So the last area to consider would be control. So we talked about like what needs to be accessed, how do you secure that stuff. Initially, I talked about the fact that there's no visibility into what users are doing. So there should be some level of control over a user's environment, even when they are remote and not working on work computers. So this is the most challenging thing to do, but there are some methods that are out there to allow you to do that. So the most important, I think, is to start with a set of behavioral expectations of your users. Create a list of policies that people must follow, right? They must have antivirus on any computer that's going to access work resources. It must be fully patched. They, must be connected to secure wireless or connected to a VPN. All those things that I talked about, if you lay those out in policy first, you'll go a long ways towards educating people on what they need to do, and you'll get some kind of accountability from your staff to do the right thing. They've been made aware of the policies. If they have any questions on how to do it, it gives them an opportunity to ask about it. So a policy is kind of the first step, regardless of what the next steps is. It may be the only step you take towards control, but it's the most important one. So after you have a policy, the next step would be to add layers to enforce that policy. So there are things that can be done to like monitor certain things, right? You can be able to tell if a workstation is connecting to a resource and doesn't have antivirus. The next layer may be to prevent a computer from connecting to a work resource that doesn't have antivirus or is not patched. So you start adding these layers to either check that something is being done, or in some cases, enforce it and make sure that it is being done. Multi-factor authentication is a good way of exerting some level of control. So if you're not familiar with multi-factor, this is when you log into a website and then you also get something like sent to your cell phone that gives you the text or the numerical code to enter to get in. It ensures that someone from a far off place randomly isn't just getting in because they know the password. It requires that second factor of authentication to get in. With a lot of multi-factor systems, you have some visibility into where people are logging in from, and in some cases you have control over allowing where they are able to access things from. So that gives some level of control. Similarly, a single sign-on solution. So this would be a solution where you basically give someone a very secure login to a web portal, and then from that portal, that's where they would access other things. So you would log into this secure site. It would be very secure to get in. It would have a complex password. It would have multi-factor. And then once you're in that, you would click on getting to your webmail, or you'd click to get into your Salesforce program, or any of the other web-based applications that users need to get into. You would just click on and it would allow you to easily get there. So this would be analogous to like creating a very secure front door with like an alarm system and a badge code and a deadbolt. But then once you're inside the house, you just allow kind of free access to the different rooms inside there. And people can kind of go where they need to go, and it would be secured because you know they got in the front door and they're legit, and then you can kind of ease security on other things. But as it relates to control, what this allows you to do is very quickly determine what people are able to get into, right? So if you wanted to withdraw access from Salesforce from someone, you can just pull that off the list, and then they no longer have the ability to get in there. So that gives you kind of full control over where people are getting to if it's a web interface. And then kind of the last area that to really exert full control would be to do some kind of a virtual desktop infrastructure or terminal services type of arrangement. This is basically where a workstation logs into a remote server, and that server contains the entire user experience. Their desktop is on the server. Any applications that they run would exist on that server. So you could connect from any workstation in the world. You securely connect, but you're never taking anything off of that computer or removing it. It's a very controlled workspace. In certain situations, it can make a lot of sense. If a business is in a situation where they've got a lot of aging desktops, and now they're in a situation where they either have to replace them all with laptops or do something else, you can do something like a virtual desktop infrastructure to give them the ability to work. Everyone would be working on a server, and then they can connect to it wherever, and you're less concerned with things about like antivirus and all of those situations, because they're not actually remoting in to do things on the network. They're just remotely controlling something that exists on a server. So those are the things that can be done with control. So that marks the end of what I had to present. I'm certainly available to questions as those come up. I did want to kind of throw this out there. TeamLogic IT has some resources that we can share with people about this whole remote workforce things and things you should do. So you see on the screen here, we have a checklist for people to consider. Contains a lot of the things I've talked about here. There's a tip sheet that we have. So if anyone has interest in this, you can just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to share this with you in a PDF, all of the above there. So That's all I got. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that may have come in. I assume we have some ability to submit those. So Courtney, I'll hand it back to you, and unless there are things that I can answer for people.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. That was very informative and, gave us a better perspective on what we can do to protect ourselves as best as we can. But, like you said, there's no way to be 100% secure all the time, which makes sense. Things are changing so quickly all the time.
Indeed.
Um, as I wrote in the chat for everyone who is attending, if you have any questions, you are now able to raise your hand virtually. So how you would do that is at the bottom. You should have an option where it says raise hand. And if you raise your hand, I will give you the ability to talk, and you will be able to ask Ryan any question that your heart desires.
I don't know that we're opening it that broadly, but go ahead and give it a shot.
We'll try to keep it. We'll keep it IT related. It looks like we have a question here. Is there a website you recommend to check for scams, such as if you suspect a scam?
Sure. So for most of our security related stuff, we lean pretty heavily on Sophos, SOPHOS. They are a great resource for kind of all things security. They just do security stuff, whereas a lot of companies kind of dabble in security, or they've got other divisions. So they've got a blog, a security blog that I subscribe to that kind of keeps us up to date on some of the scams going on. So for me personally, that's the first place I would look, is go to Sophos and see if there's a known scam out there.
Ryan, I have a question for you. Thanks for that answer. So
Sure.
Is there a way to boost our video quality? Since we're spending all of our time on the video, and sometimes I notice people going in and out, can you, anything that we can do to improve that?
So bandwidth is going to be the main thing. Video doesn't really require a lot of bandwidth, but it's very dependent on a nice constant stream of data, just like a voice call. So bandwidth would be the main thing to make sure you have enough bandwidth. This isn't really so much a work from home thing, but a work from office thing would be to do a quality of service on specific communications. So that's very common for voice over IP, to dedicate a channel that gets higher priority. The same could be done for video traffic. So if we're talking about an office environment, you could do that. Another thing is just the performance of the workstation that it's on. If a workstation's hard drive is bogged down, or it's got video graphics card that doesn't have enough memory or something like that, those are things that can impact video quality. So those are the things to consider.
I'm kind of curious for if we have issues at home. So I have a service provider at home who's AT&T, and when we're all on our systems and the kids are doing homework and playing video games and I'm working and we've got our cell phones going, there's definitely a bog in the speed of things.
Sure.
And I've called AT&T, and they came and kind of checked things out and said, well, we've improved your service a bit. Sure. But it really hasn't helped. So what are my options at home? Is there anything that I can do?
More bandwidth and more speed is probably the main thing that a user could do. Those other things like quality of service are really more IT things that can be done. So yeah, if AT&T it's very common to call an ISP and say, hey, my internet is sloppy, or it's slow, or it's having problems, and for them to lead with, do you want to buy more bandwidth? And that's the easy answer. It will likely solve the problem. I'm not convinced most ISPs are on the up and up as far as the amount of bandwidth they're providing. So maybe the first thing to do would be to check your bandwidth. If you just go and Google speed test or something like that, there's a lot of different utilities you can go out there to see how fast your internet is, and look at your contract and see what it's supposed to be. In a lot of cases, you'll find that you're not getting the bandwidth that you should, and then you can call the ISP and say, hey, this says I'm supposed to be getting this. I've tried these different sites, and here's what I'm actually getting. And they'll, kind of like, oh, I don't see any problems, but then magically it'll get better. So maybe start with that. Just check what you should be getting, compare it against what you're actually getting by just Googling speed test and clicking on one of those.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Courtney, were you going to ask a question?
Yes, we actually had a raised hand. So Brian, I'm going to allow you to talk. You will have to unmute yourself, but you should be able to. There we go. All right, Brian.
Thanks, Courtney, but Ryan already answered my question. I had typed in the question about how to check for scam emails, so the Sophos question or response took care of that. Thank you.
sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
So I wanted to ask a little bit, if I could, just about virus protection. Like, I think we, at the Chamber, all of us use Norton Security. And for an example, I get a pop-up message, I'm looking at it right now, that says I haven't completed my product registration. Like, do I call you guys for help with that? Or what do you recommend for virus protection and managing and maintaining it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different virus protection. There's a lot of good virus protection out there. Virus protection providers tend to leapfrog each other with like which one is kind of considered to be the best. Like I mentioned earlier, we use Sophos for all of our security related stuff. That includes the antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware stuff. So if I was to recommend one, it would be Sophos. Norton is certainly a reputable antivirus provider. IT people tend to kind of be anti-Symantec and those kinds of things because it is so kind of popular, but they do a fine job. The most important thing with antivirus, though, is to make sure it's current. So if the license has lapsed, it may not be getting definitions. So it could be a great antivirus software, but if it doesn't have good definitions, then it's not going to be nearly as effective. The thing about viruses is they're most potent and they're new. So you really need the antivirus software to be updating. As to like what should you do, by all means, yeah, you could call us and we can look into that, whether it's a current license or in some, like for our clients we provide antivirus because it is such a fundamental thing. So that's part of the support contracts that we have with clients.
So for your clients right now, Ryan, how are you able to service folks that are working from home? How is that working out for you, and what are you doing?
We didn't really change too much about the way we operated or anything. We just changed where we were working from. I mentioned earlier we have voice over IP phones, so we kind of just took all our stuff remote. Didn't change anything about like the numbers they call to get access to us or the email addresses or our ticketing system. None of the things we had changed. The things that we did change is we're kind of scaling back a little bit on client visits for a while there, and we're just doing emergency type visits. We scaled back a lot of projects because those required on-site. But all in all, it hasn't changed too much about what we do. We were able to remote into each of the workstations and servers we support. So we were already in a position where 90 to 95% of the things we needed to do were remote to begin with. So kind of forcing us into that has really not been a significant adjustment. Our adjustment has really been more from helping our clients adjust. So we have, the last 3 months have been the busiest 3 months, like 1, 2, and 3 by ticket count in the history of our company. So there was a big, huge push right away. Like everyone kind of panicked, like I need to be able to do this and I can't do it from home. What do I need to change? We were fielding that stuff all day. Now it's sort of morphed back into like, okay, now I'm going back to work. What do I need to do? Those kind of things. So we've been very busy, but it hasn't affected how we work.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Thank you for that. It looks like we have a question, and that is, if VPN performance isn't satisfactory, is there another secure way to access and share files, especially for widely distributed workforces?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as sharing files specifically, there are certainly secure ways of doing that. Some like a cloud-based file system like Ignite, like I talked about earlier, would be a secure method for sharing files. But that doesn't mean that being on a shared wireless while you're accessing Ignite is a good idea. Someone could hijack that connection and do some kind of keystroke monitor and do those kind of things and take something that is perfectly secure to start with and make it insecure, right? You can have a secure house, but as soon as someone has the key to your house, then you've kind of given up a level of security. As far as VPN performance goes, that's typically the product of two things. The most obvious is that bandwidth thing again, which will continue to be an issue for anything you're doing remotely. But the power of the thing that you're connecting to is also a contributing factor. So as a lot of our clients moved out remote, we have a 70 person company that we support, where everyone all of a sudden moved out remotely, and every single one of them was told to put VPN on their workstations and tunnel in back into the office to do their work. The firewall was not equipped to handle the performance requirements of 70 simultaneous connections. So in that particular case, we ended up changing the behavior to make it more appropriate. But in that case, the firewall upgrade would have been what was needed to give more ability, because it's basically going to be handling all those transactions. So if there's a lot of people VPNing into the same thing, making that same thing capable of handling all those connections is a big part of what it would be required to make it work.
Okay. I do have a question, which is, how would we go about moving our business into the cloud?
So that's kind of a challenging question, that it depends, right? I mean, a lot of things in IT, you ask an IT person and the first thing out of their mouth will be, it depends. And that's the reality of it. The kind of method that we use is to move to the cloud one service at a time, right? So I mentioned in my presentation about email services being kind of already moved to the cloud with Office 365 and G Suite. And then the file services would be taking another network service and migrating that to the cloud and putting that in something like Ignite. Other services could be, maybe it's something that does depend on running on a server itself. So maybe that component you take and you move that to a co-location or a hosted type server solution so that it's not on premise. So really the answer is that you have to figure out service by service what makes sense. And it might be that you take the entire infrastructure and all the services and you just put it on a server that's running with Azure or something in the cloud, and you just run it the same way it is now. But the more likely scenario is you got to pick apart each individual service and figure out the best way to be able to provide that service in the cloud.
Okay. All right. So for that, somebody would really want to sit down with a professional team like yours and just talk through what their needs are and what they're currently,
it all
how they're being
starts with
serviced.
the needs of the business are what drives IT to do what we do. If someone says, "Oh, we've got an IT solution for you, here's what you should do," then it's probably not going to necessarily fit the needs of the business. So it's got to start there.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think, just thinking about how we're meeting right now via Zoom, and the stories that we've heard that are really entertaining. I guess I should ask you, have you been, what is it called? Is it Zoom bombed when somebody enters your Zoom conference call? And
yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah.
Has that happened to you?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, but the thing about that is you don't necessarily know, right? I don't do things that are necessarily secure on Zoom, right? So if someone were to get in on this meeting right here, I wouldn't panic, because that's fine. They're happy to have this information as well, right? So we're not discussing passwords on Zoom meetings and things like that. Zoom itself is not an insecure platform. There's been a lot of news in the past couple months about security vulnerabilities of Zoom. It's not that it's insecure, it's just getting a lot of attention right now. And which isn't to say that it doesn't have some security vulnerabilities, but to my earlier point, there is no such thing as 100% secure. It's just getting a lot of attention. So we use Zoom. We also use Teams to some extent. I'd be surprised if the reality was that Zoom was less secure than Teams or any of the other things out there. That's something that they're addressing. They've just benefited from being the 200-pound gorilla in the space.
Right. Okay, well, that's good. That's good. We don't hate to have to cancel all these Zoom meetings that we have.
Right.
I don't see other questions from any of our participants right now. Courtney, do you have any follow-up questions?
Oh, we did get one. What is a recommended home network, one user, for antivirus software on a desktop, not a Mac?
So again, I would go to Sophos. Sophos does have a free home software. So as long as it's not for corporate use, there is a free home version that it's the same antivirus product that we use on all our business computers. It just doesn't have a licensing cost. So that's where I would go for that. Other providers do have free home versions of antivirus now, so it's not even anything that people need to buy for their home anymore. So that's good. That didn't used to be the case back 10, 15 years ago. You had to buy it even if it was for your home computer, and people have a hesitance to buy anything for their computer, their home computer, I think. So.
Thank you. If anyone else has another question they'd like to ask, you can raise your hand. There's no one in line, so you'd be the first up. And if not, that's okay too. I'm sure Ryan would not mind if you reached out to TeamLogic if you have any questions. You know where to find them. They're located in Mountain View. It sounds like they're working from home right now with safe social distancing still, so that's great.
Yeah, by all means, there's my email address there if you have any follow-up questions or anything, or if you want those products that I had on that previous page, by all means.
All right. Any final thoughts, Ryan, before we wrap up?
That's all I have. I just thank you guys for the opportunity to get the word out there. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Well, it looks like we had one raised hand. Lizanne, did you want to talk? Let me allow you to talk. Lizanne, you are able to talk right now. I saw that you had a raised hand.
Yeah, just one question. I have gotten several emails from my Kiwanis members, from different clubs that are obviously, they weren't sent from them. Who is it that has the breach in their computer? Is it my contact list that's breached, or are the two different individuals that I'm seeing these same similar emails coming from, is it something from their computer?
It could be from either. It's probably not, the source of the spams is probably not either of those computers. The list itself could be just an email, being intercepted and like, oh, there's a list of email addresses so people can, act like they are, spoof another email address. So there's really no way to know where it originated from. The most important thing in cases like that is to get the word out to the entire group that it seems to have been hijacked by someone and the illegitimate emails are being sent out from it. But spam is a horrible problem. Some kind of spam filter is definitely recommended to guard against that. But unfortunately, there's no way to really know the source of it.
Yeah, these all have links to a website with a sorry, we should have sent this to you sooner.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the DNS protection that I mentioned, like a Cisco umbrella would be a version, or it used to be OpenDNS is a version of something that, like, if you clicked on that actual link, it would basically say, yeah, this is known to be bad and would prevent you from getting there. But DNS protection is not a very common thing, certainly on home systems, and I would say even on a lot of work systems, it's not very prevalent.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I should also say that's another one of those areas where it does depend on user training to be able to understand what to be on the lookout for, right? You probably looked at it and said, oh, this looks suspicious. And so something about what was on there led you to that conclusion, even though it wasn't blocked by any kind of spam filter or anything like that. It takes a user being suspicious of things to often be the last line of defense.
Okay. All right, Courtney. Thank you so much, Ryan. This was really informative and helpful, and I'm glad that we have your contact information. And this webinar has been recorded so that we'll be adding this to our Back to Business series so that folks can watch it after the fact. Courtney, do we have more that you want to add?
You will see in the chat, I've added a link to another Zoom meeting that we'll be having. Next week, we will be hosting our social hour. Normally during this time of year, we would be, poolside with our open wine bar or on a glamorous rooftop. And of course, the whole point of that is to see your faces and share stories and network. So since we aren't able to do that in person, we would love to do it with you over Zoom. We will be having a background competition. So come with your best Zoom background and just come jump on the call. We'll share some stories, just get some human interaction, to be honest with you all. So we hope that you register and you're able to attend, even if it's just for 10 minutes to say, hey, we miss everyone, stay safe. Whatever you are wanting to do, just hopefully you can join us next week.
Great. All right. Well, then that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone, for joining our Back to Business series. And we will have another Back to Business in 2 weeks. Right, Courtney?
We will.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Bye, everyone. Wash your hands. Stay safe.